Hello, everyone, and before we start this episode of Stuff Explained, I'd like to kindly ask you to leave a review, throw up some stars on Apple Podcasts and wherever else you can leave reviews for Stuff Explained. Also, follow us on social media, on Twitter and Instagram at Motley Experience. That's MOTLEY XPERIENCE. Use the hashtag Stuff Explained. I'd really like to build a community around the topics and ideas that are discussed on this show. You can also find me on Facebook, or find the show, The Motley Experience, on Facebook. You can find me on social media at ATMarousas. That's ATMAROUSAS. So again, please go ahead and leave some reviews and some stars, and don't be shy. Tweet about the show, tweet at me, tweet ideas, comments, anything really that comes to mind as part of the Stuff Explained community. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy the show. Life is a journey of exploration, learning, and growth. Basically, the world is full of fascinating stuff. Join me, Aristides Marousas, as I uncover interesting facts and discuss big ideas on Stuff Explained from the Motley Experience. Experience your world. So a few weeks ago, I came across this article in the Los Angeles Times about the Marshall Islands, specifically the issues that they are facing regarding nuclear pollution and climate change. And this was something that I had never even really heard of before I knew of the Marshall Islands. I knew a little bit about the nuclear testing at Bikini Atoll, but beyond that, I thought it was kind of a one and done type of deal. But what this article began to describe was shocking, to say the least. And so I thought it was important to create a podcast episode around this and provide as much information in a short amount of time as I could to really bring awareness to what's going on in the Marshall Islands, again, with regards to nuclear pollution and climate change. So the Republic of the Marshall Islands is a small nation of islands and atolls located between Hawaii and Australia. The atolls are the remnants of ancient volcanoes that once protruded from the Pacific Ocean, and they were settled about 3,000 years ago by the ancestors of present-day Marshallese who crossed the ocean on boats from Asia and Polynesia. Now, the Marshall Islands and the people that call them home are under threat from two main forces: nuclear pollution and climate change. From 1946 to 1958, the United States conducted 67 nuclear weapons tests in the Marshall Islands. If their combined explosive power was parceled evenly over that 12-year period, it would equal 1.6 Hiroshima-sized explosions per day. As Bob Hope reportedly once said, "We located the one spot on Earth that hadn't been touched by the war and blew it to hell." The largest American nuclear weapons test was called the Bravo shot and was 1,000 times greater than the weapons that were used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. At 15 megatons, the Bravo shot vaporized 3 islands. Its flash was also seen from Okinawa, 2,600 miles away. Its radioactive fallout was later detected in cattle in Tennessee. U.S. authorities came to evacuate residents on the Rongelap Atoll 2 days later, but by that time some islanders were beginning to suffer from acute radiation poisoning. Their hair was falling out in clumps and their skin was burned and they were vomiting. 3 years after Castle Bravo, U.S. authorities encouraged resettlement so researchers could study the effects of lingering radiation on human beings. And while it is true that these people do not live the way that Westerners do, civilized people, it is nonetheless also true that they are more like us than mice. That was a quote from Merrill Eisenbud, a U.S. official with the Atomic Energy Commission, and this was said at a January 1956 meeting of the agency's Biology and Medicine Committee. Cancer cases, miscarriages, and deformities greatly increased. 10 years later, in 1967, 17 out of the 19 children who were younger than 10 and on the island the day Bravo exploded had developed thyroid disorders and growths. Now, if we fast forward to 2001, an independent nuclear claims tribunal awarded the Republic of the Marshall Islands $2.3 billion in health and property damages, but there was no mechanism to force the United States to pay it. Washington does not consider itself liable beyond the original settlement, and it points to additional tens of millions of dollars it grants every year to environmental, food, and healthcare programs. Psst, hey. Hey, you. Yeah, you over there listening to Stuff Explained from the Motley Experience. So if you're already listening to Stuff Explained from the Motley Experience, why not take that next step and head on over to themotleyexperience.com/connect. Then all you got to do is enter your email address and you instantly become a part of the Motley Experience community. By doing this, you'll get the weekly insider newsletter that gives you all the latest and greatest from the Motley Experience, including updates from your favorite podcast, Stuff Explained. Again, themotleyexperience.com/connect. There's absolutely nothing like having custom-made quality music for whatever your project might be. So if you're in the market for custom-made music, look no further than Retcon Industries. They provide tailor-made music for all sorts, whether it's professional wrestling, podcasts, trailers, and so much more. They can do it for you. So for more information, go to www.retconindustries.com or email my good friend Greg at retcongreg@gmail.com. Retcon Industries can also be found on Facebook and on Instagram at Retcon Industries. That's RETCON Industries. Runit Dome holds more than 3.1 million cubic feet of U.S.-produced radioactive soil and debris, including lethal amounts of plutonium. This is the most nuclear waste from the United States found anywhere in the world. It took about 4,000 U.S. servicemen 3 years to scoop up 35 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of contaminated soil and debris from the islands and then dump it into the center of Runit Island. 6 men died during the cleanup, and hundreds of others developed radiation-induced cancers and maladies that the U.S. government has refused to acknowledge. Today, this concrete dome, which locals call the tomb, is at risk of collapsing from rising sea levels. So officials in the Marshall Islands have lobbied the U.S. government for help, but American officials have declined, saying that the dome is on Marshallese land and therefore the responsibility of the Marshallese government. But the American government withheld key pieces of information about the dome's contents and its weapons testing program before the two countries signed a compact back in 1986, releasing the U.S. government from further liability. So, for example, the United States did not tell the Marshallese that in 1958 it shipped 130 tons of soil from its atomic testing grounds in Nevada to the Marshall Islands. U.S. authorities also didn't inform people in Eniwetok, where the waste site is located, that they'd conducted a dozen biological weapons tests in the atoll, including experiments with an aerosolized bacteria designed to kill enemy troops. So today, U.S. officials maintain that the dome has served its, quote, intended purpose, which apparently was to hold radioactive garbage, not necessarily to be a radiation shield. And this is a distinction that is not really well understood in the Marshall Islands, where many have assumed that the United States built this dome to protect them from the radiation. Adding some further alarm is a study published this year by a team from Columbia University. A group of scientists have shown that levels of radiation in some spots in Eniwetok and other parts of the Marshall Islands now rival those found near Chernobyl and Fukushima. So, climate change is making matters on the Marshall Islands even worse. if you can believe that. Rising water levels and water temperature are threatening the ecology of the area, leading to thousands of dead fish washing ashore, algal blooms, bleached and dying coral reefs. Even outbreaks of diseases like dengue fever are beginning to plague Marshall Islands residents. Now, China is taking an increasing interest in the Marshall Islands and other Pacific Island nations. And while the United States might tout this as infringement and from a geopolitical point of view paints it as a negative picture, for the island residents of the Marshall Islands, this might actually be a good thing, as it's alarmed U.S. leaders, leading them to pay more attention to the grievances of the Marshallese leaders. Leaders from the Marshall Islands have been loud voices in the fight against climate change. They know time is running out as thousands of Marshallese relocate to the United States. Rising sea levels are destroying property and leading to unsanitary conditions for many residents. They hope that the United States and the rest of the world can take notice of what has happened and is happening to the Marshall Islands as a result of both nuclear pollution and climate change, and quickly make the proper reparations and adjustments necessary, not just for the sake of the Marshall Islands, but for the whole world. So that wraps up this episode of Stuff Explained regarding the crisis currently ongoing on the Marshall Islands. It's, again, just to quickly sum up, nuclear pollution from decades past, climate change, and just really what all this comes down to, besides the physical, literal loss of land and all the issues that come with that, such as the diseases and the destruction of infrastructure, is a destruction, a loss of a culture of a people, as the Marshallese flee because they really have no other choice in many cases. And there was a quote from one of the residents that said something along the lines, I'm about to paraphrase now, that what happens here will happen to you. So what the Marshallese are trying to do is essentially use their own plight as an example of what will happen to other nations, other countries, other people. They might be the first to go, but they certainly won't be the last, is essentially the theme that they're trying to provide. So again, I hope you found this interesting. I was definitely awestruck. I did not realize how much nuclear pollution existed on the Marshall Islands. I've always seen picturesque images. If anything, it was that old footage of the Bikini Atoll bomb, but I always figured it was one, maybe two bombings, not as many as there were. About 67, I believe, as I said earlier. Yeah, 67 nuclear weapons tested there, plus all the bioweapons tested later on. So it's incredible to think about, not necessarily in a positive sense. I hope this has provided some insight, a bit of an expanded viewpoint on the world. I'm, of course, a proud American citizen, but just because you're a proud citizen does not mean you ignore where your country has done wrong. And in this case, it seems to me that there was definitely some wrong done back in the 40s and 50s, and the Marshallese are paying for it and have been paying for it in decades since. So hopefully this is a warning. Hopefully more people read this article in the Los Angeles Times. If you go to themotleyexperience.com on the link for this particular episode, you'll find the links that I used as sources. You'll find the link to the LA Times article. I would definitely recommend reading that. It goes much more into depth, more in detail than I wanted to do on a short form podcast. So I strongly recommend you do that. And hopefully the more people who know about this, the more likely action, some positive progressive action can be taken. Thanks for listening to this episode of Stuff Explained. Until next week. Stuff Explained is written and produced by me, Aristides Marousas. Music is produced by the talented Greg Massey of Retcon Industries. Visit themotleyexperience.com for more thoughtful original content, and you can also find links to the sources used for each episode of Stuff Explained. Like us on Facebook at The Motley Experience, follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Motley Experience, and use the hashtag Stuff Explained. If you like this episode, Leave a review, subscribe, and share with a friend. Thank you for listening.